Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of the RaMen. This is episode 125, and the motto of this show is that anybody can complain, and everybody does, but I want to talk to somebody who not only has a plan to make things better, but is actively already working on it. And today I'm going to have a guest on that I've had on before. This is an old friend of mine, Vanessa Gagne. I've known 20 years ago. Back then, you were chasing a degree in organic chemistry, and you were tutoring in calculus and all of that. But then you got involved in animal welfare and and ran off to Africa to save the elephants.
I did. I actually wound up getting my degree in geology, which is kind of how I started anyway. And I was working as an environmental geologist at the City of Denton landfill and working on their leachate recirculation system. And I loved it and it was great, but the economy slowed to a halt. There was a hiring freeze. There was no guarantee I was ever going to even be offered a full-time position there from my college internship. And I happened to go down to the Renaissance Festival in Waxahachie here in Texas, and I saw the elephants there, and it reminded me of a promise I made to myself when I was a very, very little girl, that I wanted to work with elephants. And that's kind of what I always wanted to do my entire life, actually, is be an elephant keeper. And I came home and I looked up on the Dallas Zoo how to get a job working with the elephants. And it said you had to have 2 years paid experience working with elephants. And I was like, well, how do you even get that? So it made no sense to me. It was just this like whole world, and to be honest with you, my school counselors, when I told them when I was in high school that I wanted to be a zookeeper, they were like, no, don't ever do that. That's horrible. That's a terrible track. You'll never make any money, which is true. I've never made any money. So anyway, fast forward, I found out that you could volunteer at the Dallas Zoo, and there was a woman that worked there at the time who was their elephant behaviorist, and I became her intern. Now I was 28 years old, already on the correct path to have a career. Definitely had already, had a degree in a different field. And I dropped everything and started valeting cars 5 days a week in downtown Dallas to pay for my bills, and volunteered at the Dallas Zoo 6 days a week, monitoring elephant behavior and as a keeper aide in the Okapi barn. And then I joined the Elephant Managers Association, and I am still a member in good standing for 12 years now of the Elephant Managers Association. I'm on their legislative committee and I'm their social media director or whatever. But anyway, I joined them. I started my first internship. I was there for 4.5 months at Riddle's Wildlife Elephant Sanctuary. And then I did wind up working at the Dallas Zoo for a very short amount of time. And then ran into some other issues, working in some other fields, and then came back and was offered a position to be a volunteer in Botswana with living with elephants with two people who they adopted orphaned elephants and trained them up. And so they lived in human care. And so I lived there for 3 months in the bush. And then I got a job at the Frank Buck Zoo, and I worked there until I got pregnant with my first. And then I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, so I left.
And then you told me this wonderful story. You told me this wonderful story about how you're in this little bitty pup tent in the bush in Botswana, and you're all alone for whatever reason. You're not in a camp of other people. And I thought you're a young woman, was 24 or something like that, by yourself.
Oh, I was 30.
You were 30 then, okay. But still, you're alone.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
I'm envisioning the total jungle situation, but I mean, here you are alone. You don't have a camp full of people, and you're just in this little pup tent. You get up in the middle of the night, for the needs that you must at times, and then you shine your flashlight into a pair of reflective eyes.
It was a female leopard. So yeah, actually, that was an interesting one. Groggy, Papa squat outside my tent. There's the leopard in heat that I'd been hearing the past 2 nights, roaming around. Yeah, it was a wonderful experience. Changed my life forever. I'll never be the same person I was before I left.
Now, didn't you also do work with elephants in Thailand?
I did. I went to Thailand. So I worked in Asian elephant conservation for 5 years with Asian Elephant Support. They're a great organization that emphasizes in situ conservation and mostly the human, like the mahout elephant bond, because 1/3 of Asian elephants live in human care. So they try to improve welfare standards and offer health workshops. And when I was with them, we delivered a 4x4 truck to Chiang Mai University veterinarians so that they could access elephant camps during monsoon season when the roads were really bad. Anyway, so I went there to help deliver that truck and went with the Buddhist monks to bless the truck. And it was also a wonderful experience. I think I went to like 6 or 7 working camps and got to visit all kinds of really great places that do pioneering work in Asian elephant conservation in the country of Thailand. And I got to work with their closest veterinarians there, who are still some of my friends to this day. There's some wonderful people that have spent their entire lives dedicated to elephants out there.
Yeah. Now, the last time I had you on was actually to talk about your work with elephants, but that's not the topic of this show. And before we get to the topic of this show, you said something to me a few days ago that you said you were also doing something for the welfare of dogs. What are you doing for dogs?
So it's kind of through this organization that I work for called the National Animal Interest Alliance. They started off as a coalition of breeders and hobby breeders and even commercial breeders with USDA licenses who wanted to revolutionize and change the basically just eliminate substandard breeders in the United States and work toward eliminating substandard breeders in the United States. And that has gone from that small kernel and added layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of people who work with horses, people who work in animal research, people who do work with exotic animals. And even like last year at our conference, we had the guy who runs the Iditarod race come and speak. He was an amazing resource. Some of the stuff I learned has just, I'll never see life the same way. It was one of those things like I just took off one pair of glasses and put on a totally different new prescription. And now my ability to understand a lot of these issues that surround basically the whole pet marketplace has really changed. And it's really set up a lot of my ability to work with USARK now, because I understand what's really going on with a lot of these like broader issues in the animal space.
And that gets us to the topic
anymore, right?
That gets us to the topic of the show. I've been doing a lot of reptile conventions of late, and I have this familiar face pop up that I haven't seen in 20 years, and I am embarrassed that it took me a good minute to piece together where I know this face.
Well, to be fair, we had our
this woman suddenly comes out of the crowd and hugs me that I haven't seen in 20 years. And you're working for USARK now.
Yeah, I am super proud of that. I feel like I feel like I'm finally in a place where I found my people, and there's some wonderful people that work there. Yeah.
So let's just have a promo bit. I mean, I just want you to explain what USARK is and does, because that is the focus of you had your moment on a previous episode. This is about USARK.
Yeah, sure. No, that's fine. So yeah, basically USARK is, again, it's a membership organization, and it's a coalition of industry experts. It's people that work with all herps. So frogs, salamanders, even like really rare iguanas, monitors, all kinds of stuff like that. People who breed them, people who sell them, people who conserve them. There are scientists, veterinarians, all kinds of people are members of USARK. And together, now it's shifted from almost like a hobby group, which still that part does exist, but it's also shifted to an advocacy group for those owners and breeders and researchers, from basically because, to put it plainly, the rights of private exotic animal owners has changed dramatically since Tiger King came out. And a lot of people got just lumped into this entire category of everyone has to be like Joe Exotic. And that's just not even remotely true. I say that as someone who has been to his facility. So there are some wonderful people out there with like the platinum standard of animal husbandry, whether it be ball pythons or elephants, and they're all lumped together as this crazy group of people who are just doing the wrong thing just because they own these animals. And there's an ideologically based agenda to completely erase that. And USARK fights against that as best we can.
So
with industry.
USARK is fighting not just for the welfare of the animals, but also for the welfare of the keepers, for whatever, including virtual hobbyists like myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So I understand that this group, the way that they fight against is what? Is it battles in court? Is it legislation? What is it?
Both. So helping, legislators, they hear a pitch and they get told an entire, run around, okay, this is what this bill is going to do. This is what this bill is going to do. But sometimes whenever an animal person reads that, we're like, hey, wait a second, that's not at all what's going to happen. For example, in New Mexico, they wanted to ban the use of camels in traveling shows. Well, that ends every Christmas pageant ever. So sometimes whenever people just need to be told, hey, wait a second, you're not really thinking about the unintended consequences of the language of this bill. So we help in that arena. And in the past, before I was employed with them, they were successful in getting some, in suing. How do I say this? This is going to take me a second. So there were some Lacey Act amendments that they wanted to add into the Endangered Species Act, and they were found unconstitutional, and USARK had a successful lawsuit in getting those removed. So we do also do legal battles when necessary. And I believe we're in the middle of a lawsuit with Florida Fish and Wildlife right now, but I cannot comment to that any further.
Okay. Well, we are going to talk about the periphery of that because that's of course important, and we'll get back to centering on USARK in just a moment. So when I a couple of months back, I got my permit to be a reptile dealer in Texas.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, well, that enables me to breed and sell we got a couple of Blairsmore, Sanderson, Texas, gray-banded king snakes, and that's an indigenous species, and they're on this one list. And so you have to. It's best to be licensed when you can have them, but to breed them and sell them, because it's an indigenous species on this list, you have to have this license for this permit. And then I was interested in getting the Texas indigo because I quite like that snake, but that's on a different list of indigenous
because they're
species.
endangered, right?
Well, they're not endangered anymore. They're protected now.
Okay.
You don't have to have a permit to have one anymore, but there's still issues if you want to breed them or sell them. And so I had to be very explicit in my emails to the Texas Public Parks and Wildlife to get in writing, because the language of the law is sometimes vague. And I say, I could interpret this two ways. Please clarify for me in writing what am I permitted to do in this instance. And so I got those clarifications, and okay, so if I could ever come up with the money, then I could get a Texas indigo. But as I understand, you say that the law sometimes changes, and what we're going to talk about now is that this is something this bothered me so much when I saw this, and not just as somebody who owns snakes. I mean, this just bothered me.
Yeah, my snake is right there. She's down there. Yeah.
What do you have?
I just have a regular ball python. She'll be 15 this year.
Okay. All right. So, I had heard things that if you better have your legal everything's in order, because then the state can come in And if they find any infraction, then they could just come in and take all your animals, including my parrot, my dog, whatever. I've heard horror stories like that. So I want to make sure that everything is good in writing. So as I understand it, some months or a year or so ago, Florida changed their laws on keeping of certain reptiles, and there was a guy that was running a facility down there where when Burmese pythons and reticulated pythons were legal, the legal requirement was that you had to have a license, you had to have a permit, and the snakes had to be microchipped so that I don't know if it's for tracking or just for identification, but whatever it is, he's met all of the requirements.
Registration process or whatever.
Yeah. So then, Florida Wildlife Commission tells him that your snakes are now illegal. The snakes that you've invested all this money in, and let's just think for a moment of how much 150 snakes, where each one of them costs in the thousands of dollars. I mean, you can buy them cheap enough when they're babies,
right?
But
yes,
getting one to the bigger it is, the more expensive it is. And so he's got a bunch of 150 of these snakes, most of them being Burmese and reticulated.
Something like 130 or something like that. But yes, definitely not a small amount, and they were all adults, to my knowledge.
Yeah. So the state now comes in and says, all of your permits are now crap, and your facility is a complete waste of real estate, and your huge monolithic investment in animals is now illegal, and you have to get rid of them all now. So he, in the 90-day period they gave him, was able to rehome over 100 of these huge. Yeah. So and he's forced to do it. So this is a passion. This is something he loves. The state then tells him, you are no longer in the letter of the law, to which he wishes to remain. So he manages to rehome over 100 of these, but he's still got a few of them left. And so he made the mistake of calling Florida Wildlife Commission to ask for an extension or ask for whatever provision, whatever else he needs to do, because he's got just a couple, 3 dozen left that he's running out of time. He's trying to get all of these other snakes out of there. And then they tell him something bizarre. They prohibit him from being able to get rid of those snakes. You can't sell them out of state. You can't.
I know.
Yeah, they forced him.
Come on, buddy.
Yeah, they at one point they arrested him for suddenly being outside of the law they just changed.
Yes, and here's the crazy thing too. So those snakes were already permitted before the law changed. They were under a conditional permit. They were already microchipped and all these things. They were already there. So they basically just took them and were like, these are all illegal now. They're in this. Tegus too. There's like some others on there, right? It's not just the snakes. And that was fought to the teeth to get that banned list to not even happen. They did it anyway because they already had their mind. Basically, here's the deal. If the government tells you they're thinking about doing something, they're already doing it. They're going to do it. If they come out and we're like, oh, we're going to have a meeting about this and that, they're going to do it. They're just giving you the democracy spiel, and they're really not ever going to change. So good luck with that.
Yeah. So I mean, I've seen written documentation to the effect, from FWC to the effect that all your existing pets remain pets, and you can continue to keep them. You can't breed them or sell them anymore.
Right.
So you can never get, if your Burmese python dies, you can't get another one, but you're welcome to keep the one you have. And so they have that grandfather thing, and it's in writing, but FWC still came down on this guy and arrested him, charged him, and the charges were dropped. But let's just already look at the inconvenience that's happened to what else can you do to this guy, right? And so then they tell him that he has to maintain the animals. He's no longer allowed to get rid of them. He has to surrender them to the state, and they're going to make him, out of his own pocket, maintain them for another month or so.
Like he wasn't already as the owner anyway.
Yeah, well, suddenly they're no longer his snakes. They just said the state now owns your entire investment, and you can no longer keep them as pets, and you can't sell them, you can't rehome them, you have to maintain them. They now belong to the state. And mind you, a whole lot of these people are the very ones who would have who usually advocate for personal liberty, right? Who are anti-government, and yet we're seeing this from a lot of them. So then they come in, and they eventually they just came in the door and said, we're euthanizing all these snakes.
That's not what that's not even the premise of how they got him to open the door, though.
Yeah, please.
It is my understanding that they had a report of a python that was loose.
Yeah, a reticulated python 15 miles away.
They knock on the door and say, "Hey, can we check your enclosures and make sure that all your snakes are in place?" And that's when they were like, "Oh, just kidding. We're going to kill everything here."
Yeah.
And didn't follow their own two-step protocol. There was no veterinarian on scene that could have given them at least a way to be numb to that pain. It's extremely disturbing. It's very disturbing to see I couldn't even watch the video. I couldn't watch any of it.
Yeah, I've seen part of it. I have much the same thing. So they come in and they tell him that they're going to be killing all of his snakes. Now these things behind me, these are my babies.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy has invested many years in his snakes.
Yeah.
And not, let's just throw out the money. Let's talk about the emotional investment. And the very first one, they pull out and they tell him they want him to hold it down while they kill it.
I know. It's like, what are you talking about?
How much more horrific?
Animals at all is what I want to know.
How much more horrific can a government agency be? Yeah, I'm sorry, I was talking over you there. What did you say?
I was just saying, I don't know how these people were employed to be working with animals at all. I don't know an animal person alive who could do that. I mean, we already have enough. I've totally been there as a zookeeper when we've had to euthanize something, and even my own pets, but there is no part of working with animals where you're like, hold them down, let's get them. Like, that is just not.
So he can't even be in the room when they pull out a bolt gun, which just like basically fires a rivet through the skull of these snakes. That's how they're killing them. And he set his camera up. He just put his phone on to record what was going on and walked out. And I'm really glad he had the presence of mind to do that. It's a very disturbing video as these 3 or 4 government agents with gleaming smiles
the whole time
slaughter all of these snakes. They're having a good old time killing this snake, laughing. If they kill a snake and then they hold it up, take a picture, and toss it in a trash can while it's writhing because they didn't do it right.
Yeah.
And ultimately, at the end, they made the guy clean up his own floor. After, there's just blood everywhere. There's bodies everywhere, and they take the bodies, I guess, but they left the blood because I've seen the picture. And then, as he leaves the room, he's already told them, and this is on the recording too. He's pointed out which one is the boa because it was an important boa. This is not a wild animal. This is a specialty morph. This is a banana yellow boa that was gravid, which means that it was pregnant, and it had 26. Boas give birth live as opposed to pythons. Yeah, pythons 32. Lay eggs, but boas give birth live. And so it had 26 fully developed babies in it, ready to be born. And it was legal. He pointed out which one is the boa because that one's legal. You don't touch this. He said it repeatedly. He showed each of them. He had the cage marked. This one, leave this one alone. And it's on the video where they hauled it out as if it was a wild animal. So they're being very rough and needlessly rough and violent with this snake. And when they bolt gunned it, it continued writhing on the floor for 20 minutes because they were supposed to anesthetize it. They were supposed to do this thing where there's a follow-up procedure that makes sure that the animal is dead, and it's all quick and fast. But no, this is not what they did. It's horrific what they did.
And that means that all of her babies suffocated. They were
Yeah.
deprived of
So
oxygen and they died in there, in her.
yeah. So now yeah. And the value just in dollars of the baby snakes alone is roughly $100,000. I've heard that number recounted a number of times. So this guy comes back in and he sees that they've killed the boa and he just freaks out. And I remember hearing him say, "I told you 10 times you can't," and he's livid. He's crying now. And these guys have been doing nothing but laughing throughout this. So you want to talk about people, coming in with the jackboots and just destroying everything for the fun of it because they were having fun.
That's probably how they got to the point of, I don't know. I can't speculate on that. I'm not going to speculate on that. They were
as a result
that way.
Yeah, as a result, USARK got involved, of course. And I think they were already involved in litigating and protesting certain changes, certain behaviors of what was going on. I don't know exactly what they were doing up to this point.
USARK Florida was involved in the Florida stuff. And then USARK, overarchingly, as representatives of everyone that's a member, does the overarching part. But USARK Florida made their own chapter just because there's so much nonsense going on in Florida.
Yeah. So now I understand that there is, what might have already happened. It was imminent. A massive protest in Tallahassee that was supposed to be, all these people at the office for FWC calling for, I don't know, whatever these protests are supposed to do with speakers and everything. Would that I could.
I don't know if they did that. I just know for the record, on May 10th and 11th, the next FWC meeting is going to be in Miami. Be there or be square.
There you go. That's the one.
But
yeah. I wish I could attend that one.
Me too. I wish I could go too. I would absolutely be there. I don't know what some girl from Texas is going to be able to say or do to make them change their mind, since nobody of their own constituency can even make their change their mind. But if you attend and you are able to attend, just remember, keep it civil, keep it to facts, and make sure that they know.
This is not a riot. Violence will not work.
Yeah, no. And, these are officers of the law. So don't play games. Just go there, say what you have to say, let them know that they are 100% in the wrong, regardless of what their paper says and whatever they're going to do to cover it up.
Well, if it goes to court, and I don't know how it would, but if something like this were to go to court, they've already seen the documentation where they have the written statement that you're grandfathered in, and that wasn't honored, and they have their own procedures, and none of that was honored, and then they had false pretenses.
Pathetic, right? It's like, goodness.
Yeah, it just like they did everything they could do wrong, pretty much. But anyway, so now I understand that USARK runs by funds from donors, and I want to include when I saw you at the HERP convention, you were getting memberships to USARK. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the different types of membership and the costs and what USARK does with that money?
So we have overhead because we have employees, so there's that. It's minimal. It's not like some of the other groups that we have that make $296 million in a calendar year of profit that are against us. But so the majority of that goes to trying to secure our own lobbying and our own attorneys whenever situations like this arise, so that we're there and we're at the ready and we're prepared and we have people that are knowledgeable about the law. And we garner that through auctions and through donations. We have membership tiers. And you can do like a facility membership, and you can do gold, silver, and like recurring memberships. For example, I joined USARK way before I ever worked for them. And I just have like $5 a month that I donate, and I have been for like 4 or 5 years. But I did that just because I myself own a snake, And before I owned my ball python, I had a corn snake, and I'll probably always have reptiles in my house because I love having them as pets. And I think they're an excellent pet for people who, especially for people who live in smaller spaces, for sure. I mean, I'm lucky enough to be a homeowner, but even so, they're just great pets to have around.
And they're quiet.
Yes, they are quiet.
Okay, so as a small breeder or keeper, are there different levels that just people that have a snake, or that people you don't even have to have a snake to be
No,
in the
you don't
group?
have to have anything. You can solely join USARK just because you can see, honestly, a lot of people don't see the writing on the wall. So I will explain to you, there is a juggernaut of a movement to remove animals from our lives. And it doesn't stop at pets. It doesn't stop at agriculture. It doesn't stop at, leather and fur. It is a combined workshop, an inner network of organizations that plainly state that animals are not ours to use for anything, entertainment, food, emotional support, or anything. There are people who are completely against you having a dog. And those people are using reptiles at this time because it's become popular to demonize snakes. It's super easy to demonize snakes. So many people already don't like them, or they don't like toads, or they don't like these things. But honestly, what really happens whenever a lot of these exotic animal bans happen is you get rid of small educational programs that teach kids the conservation message about reptiles and amphibians. For example, something as simple as frogs can be used as indicator species for water quality in local environments. Reptiles are, snakes, for example, like copperheads and even rattlesnakes here in Texas, they are vermin control. They control vector species that spread disease by eating rats. So just little things like that, those are also removed whenever some of these exotic animal performance bans are passed, because they add reptiles on there. There was one in Oregon recently that would have not allowed anyone to ever bring a turtle or a tortoise to a classroom ever again in the state of Oregon. So think that, it's stuff like that where it's like, hey, wait a minute, guys, you can't end like a Boy Scout troop meeting. You can't end library shows where you've got somebody explaining to you why we have to have king snakes and that they eat venomous snakes, things like that. It is a low-hanging fruit, and it's easy for them to pick off because all they have to say are flashy, scary words, and people immediately cringe and freak out and have a response. It's a knee-jerk response. And I think it's important for people to be able to see the difference between the bad actors in the industry, and that's why USARK supports transparency in all that we do, and that our supporters do.
And just
And that's why
to let people know,
on our YouTube. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking many years ago when I was very young and did not really have the wherewithal to keep such a thing and shouldn't have had one at the time. I had I had a Malaysian water monitor, and it got out. It bent the back door open, which was something I didn't think it could do. So I come into the aluminum doors, yeah, like that. And the police were all involved, and it was a huge media circus. There were 60 people in the backyard. There was a 50-foot hook and ladder truck. There was like all 3 news channels, 2 newspapers. It was a whole bunch of people in this backyard as the police shot my lizard out of a tree, and with a shotgun. And they identified it as a venomous tree climbing alligator. And when I asked them why would they call it an alligator, they said because we don't have laws against lizards. And so that's like we were saying, they're gonna do it. They're just gonna find an excuse to do it, even if they have to lie about what it is. So
honestly,
not only did they do that and then inject it with potassium cyanide and put it in a freezer just to make sure that Godzilla is really dead, right? Then Then they come over to my house the next day to inspect, and I'm worried about being arrested again.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing we could be looking at.
That's the kind of thing that's already happening everywhere. That is happening constantly. I comb news articles every morning to look for that kind of stuff, and it is extremely common. Um, I will say, I don't want to. How do I say this? There are people who purposefully write the laws in an ambiguous way so that whenever law enforcement is involved, or any inspector for that matter, they can be subjective on purpose. So when they blanket statement things, you need to be even more careful, because anyone who doesn't know how to identify a snake or how to identify this monitor or anything, they're going to come in and be like, well, I thought it was a such and such, and then bam, your animal's dead or gone.
Oh, yeah, I thought this boa was a python. Yeah. Yep, there you go. All right, Vanessa, always good to see you. And
Yeah.
very, very, very proud of you, by the way.
Thank you.
All right, so I don't think I'm going to have you on another RaMen episode, but it's a possibility, seeing how you are.
Yeah, you never know.
Thank you very much for being on, and everybody else watching. I'm going to put links below for how you can join USARK, information about it, information about the coffee situation. This was Chris Coffee, who was running the facility where it was raided and everybody slaughtered in the bloodbath. And the event was called the Holy Thursday Massacre.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'll probably edit some reference to that immediately after this. So Vanessa, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me on, Aaron. I love talking to you.
My name is Daniel Parker. I'm with the United States Association of Reptile Keepers, Florida. This is a bill that gives more power to FWC's law enforcement and prosecutors. Whatever its intent, we believe the original language of this bill would have led to the deaths of native snakes, as it criminalized their humane relocation, which is why we supported the amendment that specified that only non-native species would be subject to increased penalties. However, we still have deep concern on how the term gross negligence applies to escapes of venomous snakes. We believe the language should be more specific to define what a grossly negligent escape or release would be. Furthermore, in light of events of the past few weeks, which exemplify the egregious overreach of FWC and their inhumane treatment of animals, we cannot in good conscience support anything that gives this agency more power. FWC's inadequate response to its cruel killing of a pet snake, along with 34 other animals that did not need to be killed, has been an embarrassment to our great state and our governor and first lady, who have recently demonstrated their support for the humane treatment of animals. I would implore all of you to reconsider support of FWC's bills and funding until a change is made at the agency and a commitment is made to immediately stop the euthanasia of captive animals. Thank you.
Chair, I'm
Leader
sorry.
Book?
And I appreciate, I know we're trying to get through this. I'd like to understand an inhumane killing of a venomous animal and these others. Just, FWC has always done things in the correct manner. I just would like to understand.
If you Google FWC pet right now, you'll see news stories that are being reported across the world. It's been reported in Newsweek, USA Today, Palm Beach Post, Miami Herald, NBC News, Inside Edition, and many local news outlets. There was a horrific event a couple weeks ago where FWC came in and euthanized 35 captive snakes with a bolt gun. This was done with a one-step process, which was in conflict with FWC's own recommendations on how captive animals should be, or on how animals should be euthanized. Veterinarians have told us the animals should be anesthetized before being bolt gunned, or they should be anesthetized and then chemically euthanized. FWC's own python hunters use a bolt gun and then follow that up with destruction of the brain of the animal by a process called pithing. The officers in this case took a one-step process. They stuck a metal bolt through the snake's heads, and there's video of this. One of the snakes was writhing on the floor for 20 minutes after it had been bolt gunned by the officers. And that snake happened to be a pet snake that was a legally owned snake. So we think this is just an example of egregious overreach, and we want to see this addressed at FWC.
Thank you. Okay, members, we have